This is a third episode and third day of my trip to the Cordillera Blanca in the Andes Mountains in the north of Peru. The first day, I witnessed a massacre of hundreds while on a bus. The second day had massive violent demonstrations. This day would prove as interesting. My guide Pedro and I left about midnight for our hike. It was going to be a very long day. We walked through a number of tiny Quechua villages. These are descendants of the Inca. They all lived in extreme poverty. They had no electricity, running water, and sewage. I understand the Peruvian government pushed them higher up into the mountains onto lesser valued land. I think the highest villages were above 15,000 feet, or nearly 4,600 meters. It was an awful life. Later in my trip to South America, I would come across a village that was above 16,700 feet, or 5,100 meters, in southern Peru. This was on my way to Bolivia. Their houses were made of adobe, and the roofs were thatched, which looked to be made of straw. Under the Inca Empire, their lives were good. The Spanish were shocked by the standard of living these people enjoyed, but all that came crumbling down with the invasion of the Spanish. We had several days' worth of food, plus climbing equipment. I also had everything with me for my trip around South America. My backpack was extremely heavy. We spent most of the day well above the tree line. I've traveled through mountain ranges around the world, and these were astounding. The most beautiful range I have seen was the Torres del Paine in southern Chile. These in Peru rivaled the ranges I have seen in Alaska and the Himalayas. We passed the most beautiful lake I've ever seen. It was perfectly clear and green in color. There was a gold-colored substance on the bottom that showed through the water. It was almost as if it had been painted. I'm not sure if that was algae or possibly sulfur content in the rock. The lake was at the base of a glacier-capped mountain. We set up camp at well over 16,000 feet, or about 5,000 meters in elevation. I had mountain sickness with a splitting headache and was throwing up. I'd climbed too quickly and should have stayed in Juarez a couple more days. But the violent demonstrations I encountered had me concerned. I was considering going to sleep as soon as we'd stopped, but I couldn't. The glaciers and higher up in the mountain were calling me. Pedro gave me some coca leaves, and I felt slightly better. The leaves had a poor taste and were slightly bitter. It is the best thing for handling mountain sickness. As a stimulant, it is maybe somewhat more effective than coffee. This used to be in Coca-Cola, and is where the coca part of the name comes from. Cola is a nut used to quench thirst from West Africa. Coca-Cola used to have cola as well. I was then off to climb some more. Pedro looked at me like I was crazy. I like to push things physically. There is a portion of my mind that loves taking over when I think I have nothing left to give. Pedro stayed at camp. This was the tiredest I have ever been, but I would push through it. Each step was a workout, but at least I had left my 100 plus pound, 45 plus kilogram pack back at camp. My speed up from our camp was ridiculously slow. I could only take one step, then stop. This portion was also quite steep. I am not sure the altitude I reached on that day. Possibly 19,000 feet or over 5,700 meters. My legs felt like someone had hit me repeatedly with the baseball bat. The coca leaves got me out of camp, but after gaining another 1,000 to 1,500 feet, 300 to 400 meters or so in altitude, the mountain sickness had me hallucinating. Pushing myself as I did probably added to it as well. The rocks started laughing at me. I can't tell you how upset I was with them. Maybe that's what rocks do at that altitude. I was even too tired to yell at them. When I reached the top of my climb, the sky was dancing. It was moving like waves that would turn into twister-like formations. The colors would change too. I felt like I was in a psychedelic music video from the 1960s. I reflect back and wonder if maybe a Jimi Hendrix or Jefferson Airplane song was playing in the background. Things were getting strange for me, and I remember thinking, what if up becomes down while I'm climbing, or if I lose perspective of dimensions entirely? I then won't know how to walk back to camp. That thought convinced me it was time to go back. Also, I was up in the glaciers and didn't bring my crampons, the metal teeth-like contraptions you put on shoes to prevent you from slipping on the glacier. Along with everything else, I left the crampons back at camp. While walking down, my hallucinations improved, but the rocks were still laughing at me. My head was pounding like it was my heart. My legs felt like they were filled with concrete. The weight seemed immense. I remember being extremely annoyed when I could finally see the camp at the bottom of a high cliff, maybe 300 feet, 90 meters down. A voice was suggesting that I just jump down from the cliff. I really didn't want to walk all that way. It seemed like the more sensible thing to do. If I jumped, I would be there in a few seconds. I convinced myself that it was the hallucinations talking and to not jump. This annoyed me too. When I reached camp, I had been hiking for 20 hours straight and had gone over 45 miles or 70 kilometers. When I reached camp, I noticed the rocks stopped laughing at me. I wondered if that was because they knew Pedro. Hallucinations are really common, both from the altitude and from pushing oneself. I have had them other times. I've had friends tell me they experienced similar things, and I have read about such things. That night I tossed and turned like never before. The mountain sickness was really getting to me. By morning time, I was sure I had pulmonary edema. I was sure my lungs had water in them. When I woke in the morning, I felt awful, but not nearly as bad as I had during the night and the evening. Please subscribe and like, as that is how YouTube decides to send it on to others. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and see you in the next episode.